meeting number 6 of the 44th Parliament for BOIE.
This meeting, if everything is okay, or do we have any comments on that? C'est pas mal clair. Parfait. Nous allons continuer.
So we'll go ahead. Number 2.
Previous meetings. Est-ce que il y a...
Is there any business arising? Mr. Holland.
Et Madame de Bellefeuille. Okay.
And Madame de Bellefeuille.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm just wondering, and I've had a lot of conversations with the member for Ottawa Centre. It's been very strong on this point, but we've also obviously have a lot of concerns with the area immediately outside of this building on Wellington, and have had conversations about its future. I understand that it's, at least it's my understanding now, that Ottawa Police are going to have Wellington blocked off until November. I'm wondering if it would be appropriate for a report with respect to the future of the parliamentary precinct and Wellington and in any other areas. Would that be coming to Proc? Would that be coming to BOIE? I just want to make sure that there is a report forthcoming, and to understand where that report will be coming, because in my view, it's absolutely essential that the area in front of Parliament, Wellington, is not open to vehicular traffic that is not related to Parliament.
Did you want to? I'll let Monsieur Patrice answer that question.
Yes, as you pointed out, there's many discussion in the public domain also in terms of the future of Wellington. It's something that I would hope that we could come to this committee to give a report and have a discussion potentially in camera.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Okay, nous allons continuer avec...
We'll continue with Ms. de Bellefeuille. Please go ahead. Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the minutes, there was a lot of discussion about interpreters, and you have received, I believe, a letter from the president of a union, and you've put that under business arising. Could we discuss this under business arising or the Translation Bureau? I intended to include that under point number 3, the Translation Bureau, but if you want to address it now, you are free to do so. I think that if we keep everything pertaining to that together, it would be better. Okay, so we'll keep all of our questions about that issue for point number 3. I think that would be better. Thank you.
Qui nous amène,
And that brings us, if there aren't any other points under number 2, to point number 3, Translation Bureau resource utilization for simultaneous interpretation.
over to Lucie Séguin et Monsieur Ball.
And Mr. Ball, Matthew Ball, is here with us as well. And I will ask him to speak. I don't know if there are presentations you'd like to make, or just answer questions or provide information. We can continue with questions. Last time we had a lot of questions, and I wonder if we could limit ourselves to 5 or 6 minutes each, and that will enable us to have more questions. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask questions. So if people could be as brief as possible.
You're asking your questions, and try to keep them to 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll let the next person go. And then what we'll do is we'll loop around again and start over, if that's okay. And again, I'll let everyone be their own police officer and control their timing. On va commencer avec Madame de Bellefeuille.
We'll start with Ms. de Bellefeuille. Please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't see my colleagues around the table, Mr. Chairman, so I don't know if other members raised their hands before me. Can you tell me whether that's the case? You're the only questioner who has asked for the floor up to now. Thank you. I certainly want to allow Mr. Julian time to ask his questions because he did not have time last time. But since you've given me the floor, I will go ahead. My questions are fairly simple. When you came last time to make your very interesting presentation, and we certainly learned a lot about how the Translation Bureau works, what your responsibilities are, and those of the House administration as well. So I appreciate that you've come back this morning. You mentioned Ms. Seguin mentioned that there had been 14 incidents at the House of Commons, but I think she hadn't finished talking about the incidents because I would like to hear from her how many have taken place in the committee rooms. Thank you very much. I want to inform the committee that my colleague Matthew Ball is joining us from Winnipeg. And I also want to thank our interpreters who are working here, Cecilia, Carol, and Bryce. I want to thank you for that question as well, because we did end the meeting quite abruptly. We were talking about the number of incident reports, and I want to give you a breakdown by year. In 2019, there were 23 incidents. In 2020, 125, and in 21, 89. So we have brought that information together. I wanted to mention to the members of the board that these incidents include not only the House, but also committee rooms and the cabinet and press conferences for Parliament under the 89, 60, 76 were at Parliament. So, and in 2020, we had 110 that included all of Parliament, including the press conferences and cabinet. Thank you, Ms. Seguin. We have had public testimony indicating that the union representing interpreters contradicts what you have said. So we wanted to get information. We have had other testimony from the union representing the staff interpreters and the organization representing freelance interpreters. So the numbers are different. How can you explain that disparity? We've heard that we've had 107 incidents in committee rooms, and I imagine that includes Senate and House of Commons committee rooms. So we've had fewer incidents in the House of Commons itself, more in committee rooms. So how can you explain the different numbers that we're getting? Thank you very much. We work with the union, that is CAPE, representatives. We've been doing so since the beginning of the pandemic. That union represents all translators, terminologists, and interpreters. And we all have access to the same incident reports. I'm giving you the overall data. I don't know what methodology CAPE has used. Perhaps it has analyzed more in depth than we have these types of incidents. We know that we have over 50 interpreters working on the Hill. So I can't say what methodologies were used, but I've given you the overall numbers based on the number of incident reports. So this is the same information that we have shared with our colleagues in the union. I don't have the overview, but would you like, Mr. Chairman, for me to give over the floor now? Yes, we'll go to Mr. Julian now, and we can come back to you. Thank you. Mr. Julian. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for your presentation. My first question is regarding workplace injuries. I want to know how many injuries there have been, how many incidents of that type have affected interpreters. How many of those do you have? Thank you very much for that question. I will ask Matthew to address this, but I will first say that the incident reports are submitted by employees, and the most common symptoms or problems are headaches and ear issues. So what I've mentioned is the number of incident reports. So right now, there are no staff employees who are on sick leave because of sound problems. But among our interpreters, there are a dozen or so who are working part-time or are assigned to other tasks because they have had workplace injuries. Perhaps I could ask Matthew to provide more information if he has some. Thank you very much, Ms. Seguin. Our reports have three different types of injuries. First of all, those that put interpreters off work. They have consulted a doctor in those cases, and the interpreters are off work. And then we have slight injuries, and then we have quasi-injuries where there is no lost time. Perhaps the interpreter goes home, has ringing in the ears or a headache. Then that's called a quasi-accident because there hasn't been time lost. In 2021, out of the 99 injuries, 36 put people off work, and the others were all quasi-accidents, that is, no time lost. Does that answer your question? Thank you. It does answer my question, but those figures are different from what the union provided to us. They said that there were 68 injuries that caused interpreters to be off work. And I just want to focus on this for a minute because we need to take this seriously. We have had a recent incident where the downtown population suffered permanent injuries because of sound, excessive sound, as we know. So there is no doubt that the sound levels, noise levels in downtown Ottawa led to permanent damage. So it's the same thing here. We have interpreters who have had to take time off, sick leave, in order to recover. There can also be hearing losses that are permanent as a result. And that's why I would like to know whether we are really taking into account the number of interpreters who are suffering permanent hearing loss. Do they take hearing tests? That is done commonly in situations where there is an inconsistent or a very high level of noise. There are continual hearing tests that are provided. Is that done by the Translation Bureau?
That's a very important question, and I'd like to reiterate that the Translation Bureau management is very concerned and very aware of the issue. We do our utmost to protect the occupational health and safety of our interpreters. There are a number of studies that were commissioned by the Translation Bureau to help us to understand the long-term effects of exposure to suboptimal sound. Now, the National Research Council assisted us in that vein by undertaking an analysis in conjunction with our colleagues from the House of Commons, and the findings were that interpreters are protected against acoustic shocks, i.e. the quantity of sound. However, there are still issues to be addressed regarding the quality of sound. To supplement that information. And you've hit on an important issue, Mr. Julian. Not only do we not have a proper study, a scientific study in Canada, but there's none internationally speaking either in terms of the effects on hearing over the long haul. So there are two other studies that we are undertaking. I'll hand the floor over to Matthew, who will discuss what we're doing with the Université de Genève and Ottawa University in an effort to get more scientific data on this phenomenon. Thank you very much, Ms. Séguin. Yes, indeed, as Ms. Séguin just pointed out, there is a dearth of data, of information regarding the quality of the sound which affects the hearing of our interpreters. Now, we have called on the National Research Council to undertake an analysis of the quality of the sound that reaches an interpreter's ears in the booth. We've just done that. And we've learned from that that the quantity of sound is safe, but the quality of sound, well, there's room for improvement there. Now, the study on hearing. The Translation Bureau is currently drawing up a contract for a longitudinal study with audiologists from the University of Ottawa. And as it turns out, that particular study will enable us to have benchmark tests to do with the hearing of our interpreters, a long-term follow-up, a longitudinal follow-up, and to provide care if interpreters' hearing is damaged. We're negotiating that contract currently, and in short order, we should start that study. In fact, we hope to begin early spring. Thank you. That's a longitudinal study? It's a study over 2 years. I see. Well, the fact remains that the union has put its finger on a problem here, hasn't it? The whole issue of acoustic shocks. I understand what you're telling us here. Don't get me wrong. But I think it would be useful to have the union testify before the Board of Internal Economy to make sure we are, in fact, in agreement on this. If acoustic shocks have reduced in number, that's good. That will help to prevent further injuries. But that said, I have misgivings about the number of workplace injuries. We know how hard our interpreters work. We know how crucial they are to the work that we do here. And I'm concerned that there are so many injuries. And I know that from my own professional experience, that can lead to permanent injury. Now, a number of people have intimated that it's the sound system that's used by interpreters that, in fact, causes those injuries. Would you agree with that? Or are there other ways that interpreters can get the sound they need in order to do their job without being at risk of a workplace injury? Response. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Julian. Just to tack on to the answer given to your previous question, as you're fully aware, we've taken immediate steps to modify the working conditions of interpreters since the virtual MAID came into place. We've reduced working hours without their pay being affected. We have increased the number of interpreters by team, so we've strengthened the teams, and we've cooperated with the employees of the House administration to ensure that sound tests and other measures are being put in place. The Translation Bureau is responsible for providing you the human beings, i.e. the interpreters, but technological issues are not our bailiwick, and I think those questions would be better directed to the House administration. Could I just interrupt for a second, if I may? There are other members that will wish to ask questions. I didn't mean to cut you off, but we did agree on about 5 or 6 minutes per member. If I could just ask a final question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to filibuster here, but this is a really important issue, of course, the health and safety of the employees of the House of Commons. It's paramount. So just turning back to that particular issue, have you made recommendations to the House administration to change the AV system? And is the House administration currently considering or entertaining other options to that AV system? It would seem that the union identified this as the root cause of workplace injuries. Response: that's an excellent question. As far as technical requirements are concerned, which one, protects the health and safety of our interpreters, and two, provides quality service with minimal interruptions. Well, as far as technical issues are concerned, we are in constant communication with the technicians from the House of Commons. So we provide the human beings. We give them everything they need to provide quality service. We understand the whole human aspect of the work. On a weekly basis, even on a daily basis, we communicate with the House administration when it comes to optimal conditions from a technological standpoint. So with that in mind, I'm not comfortable really to talk about technical issues, and I'd suggest that you ask them of the House administration, who are better placed than me to answer. Mr. Ubi. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Well, in the wake of all these incidents, Mr. Julian, we have an enhancement system that we put in place since at the start of the pandemic in collaboration with the House administration. To respond directly to your question, is the root cause the House of Commons AV system? I would say that it is not. There are a number of factors that come into play that have led to these incidents, i.e. the quality of the sound, the audio chain, which has a number of components, the microphone used by the individual, the internet and bandwidth quality, the video conferencing system that we use, and also the internal House of Commons system. These are all components in the audio chain. And Mr. Julian, we have looked at them to improve them with the view of improving sound that the interpreters get. You can't just fix one link in the chain, Mr. Julian. This is a problem that we're seeing worldwide. If there was a quick fix, we would have implemented it already, Mr. Julian. I can assure you of that. We are constantly focusing on improving the quality of the sound with a view to reducing workplace injuries among our interpreters. And the reason that things have improved is thanks to our efforts. For example, we have replaced all interpretation consoles so that they get better sound. We are in the process of replacing the headsets with integrated microphones. We have assessed the system. We're looking to bring other enhancements to improve the quality of the audio. We constantly are conducting tests with international experts to ensure that the systems perform well. What I can tell you is that our systems are cutting edge, they are top-notch, and we do wish to resolve this problem. Mr. Brassard, and then Ms. de Bellefeuille and Mr. Julian, should they have further questions. I know that this is an important issue for everyone. I want to make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity to answer questions.
Mr. Chair, and before I begin my line of questioning on an unrelated matter, Mr. Julian brought up a claim of permanent hearing loss for residents of the city of Ottawa as a result of the recent protests. And I'm just wondering, and I don't know whether this is normal, but could Mr. Julian table for this committee the reports that he's referencing to that, where that claim comes from? Because I haven't seen any. And in order for us to make informed decisions around this place, I would like to see precisely where that report comes from. Could you table that,
Well,
Mr.
thank you,
Julian?
Mr. Chair. I'm delighted to answer this question.
Okay.
Because this is very fundamentally important. And this is something that I think people often try to simply brush aside, the issue of permanent hearing loss that comes from excessive levels of noise that is unprotected. And that's certainly what we saw over the last 3 weeks. So I'm answering your question, Mr. Brassard.
Yeah.
What we would need to do is see each of the individual residents of Ottawa who have gone in and seen their audiologist, and those who have yet to see their audiologist, to see the tracing of their hearing previous and then post the occupation. There is no doubt that the levels of sound reached over 100 decibels, sometimes as high as 120 decibels. That is enough to cause permanent hearing loss within minutes. And so this is, to me, something that was profoundly disturbing, and it surprised me that certain members of Parliament didn't understand the importance of actually acting so that the hearing loss that the people of Ottawa were experiencing was actually dealt with.
So the claim was made, but there's no
interrupt,
basis for the claim at this point.
Quite the contrary, Mr. Broussard.
Order.
Quite
If
the
I can have
contrary.
your attention, please, both.
All right. So
we've got some people who are very patient
I do have-
with this
I do
here.
have questions
Maybe
for
we
the
can take this
interpreters.
and maybe have a separate item altogether.
That would be-
that
would
might
love
be
that.
something we might want to look at. But for right now, Madame Séguin and Matthew Ball are here to answer our questions, and maybe we'll concentrate on them and then come back to this one. We can have our own discussions later. Mr. Broussard, please
Thank
continue.
you, sir. My question relates to parliamentary functions of interpreters and the function as it relates to the cabinet and the prime minister. We've seen, obviously, through parliamentary functions, we understand where that comes from, whether it's through committee work, work in the House, but there's also when the cabinet and the prime minister have their press conference almost on a daily basis as it relates to COVID and other issues. Can you differentiate between the numbers of injuries related to the parliamentary function and the function of the cabinet and the prime minister? Is there a way to quantify how that's played out?
Okay, very good question, Mr. Brassard. So right now, what we have been looking at are the number of incidents and those that occur in the parliamentary precinct. So we have not done the analysis to determine where is each incident occurring. We've mentioned and we're working actively with our House administration partners as well as our other clients on putting in place a rigorous monitoring process to understand where incidents are happening, what is the source of the issue, and then putting corrective measures in place immediately. I would say that the reports are being, interpreters are reporting incidents from all over the place right now, including conference interpretation for departments, agencies, as well as Supreme Court of Canada, the CRTC. So we don't have the breakdown of where incidents are happening right now.
Can you speak then to the services, the differences in those services that are provided to parliamentary resources as opposed to the cabinet and prime minister? Because my understanding is that there is a difference between the two, correct?
So the interpreters of the Translation Bureau are able to offer their services to all types of clients. So whether that be on in the precinct, to PCO, Privy Council office, but also to other government departments and agencies. I would say that the type of event is different. Like today, right now, the board of we're having a meeting with a hybrid setting. Currently, most of our meetings have a hybrid setting component, but our interpreters are always performing their work on site. So from that perspective, it is the same. But there's also the participants to meetings have different I would say levels of adherence to our recommended practices. So the wearing of headsets, making sure that you have a very stable internet connection. That tends to vary from depending on where the meetings are occurring.
Okay, so when do you expect the data collection with distinguishing between where these injuries are occurring? When do you expect that to be complete, or when are you able to provide the committee any information to show that sort of distinguishing line between what's happening with the parliamentary resources and what's happening with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet?
Okay, so if this is something that is requested of us, we could...
I would be interested in hearing that. Thank you. The other...
If I can interrupt, I believe Monsieur Patrice would like to add on to that. Maybe he's got more of the technical side of it.
Yes, and through you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Brassard, your question is very relevant to us because while the pool of interpreters is offering the service to both cabinet, Privy Council, and the press conference of the Prime Minister. It's not the technology from the technical standpoint. It's not the House who's providing that service to cabinet and the press conference and all of that. So it's a different system altogether. Okay. So those incidents would not be related, for example, to the system, the technical system that the House uses.
So if, through you, Chair, to Mr. Patrice, so if the system is not similar, does that mean that the risk of injury would be greater? Because we've applied a pretty consistent pattern or system within our parliamentary resources. Is there anything that is being used outside of those parliamentary resources, for example, in the example that you gave, that would cause the interpreters to be at any greater risk?
I could not comment necessarily on the system that the Privy Council use or for the press conference or the cabinet. Maybe Stefan has more information about that. But for us, obviously, our great concern is the safety, the health and safety of our interpreters. So that's why we continually improve, but we can only improve the system on which we have a overall responsibility. So for us, the detail that you ask in terms of the incidents and the nature of the incidents is very germane to our ability to try to find a solution and fix the problem.
Sorry, Mr. Obey, did you have anything to add, or?
Well, if you want me to just add a little bit, all I can say, Mr. Brassard, is that, through you, Mr. Speaker, is that at the beginning of the pandemic, most of the press conferences, they weren't using the same technologies of the participants, so you saw a larger incident rate that were happening at that stage. But we are working and providing advice and providing also solutions in order to minimize the risk, because we don't want the interpreters to be sick because they're participating in other types of events. So we are providing guidance in that fashion, sir, in order to limit them.
Wonderful. Mr. Chair, I do have one more question, and then I'll cede the floor, and I may come back to others as well.
Very good.
There's been an unsafe workplace complaint which has been launched against the Translation Bureau because of interpretation arrangements. Can you speak to that, just to provide committee with some insight as to what the basis of the complaint is?
Sure. What I can say about that, Mr. Brassard, is that we are aware that there is a complaint that has been filed, and it will be assigned to health and safety professional. I want to remind everyone that we're making every effort to mitigate the risks while we are trying to find solutions actively with our House administration partners and other clients, and we are fully cooperating while the complaint resolution process it gets underway. That really is the extent to which I can comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, now we'll go to Mr. McKinnon, suivi par Madame de Bellefeuille, Mr. Julian, and then back to Mr. Brassard. Oh, Mr. Calkins, okay. After Mr. McKinnon? Very good. Mr. McKinnon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, this is an issue that we are grappling with and find regrettable, because obviously health and safety, injuries and incidents are non-negotiable. I would like to know what was the rate of workplace incidents before the technologies began to be used that we are all familiar with today. Thank you. If we look at the incident reports from interpreters before, I mentioned the numbers from 2019, 23 and 2019, 2018, 4, and so a much smaller number. So it seems that there is quite a strong correlation with the arrival of the technologies being used for Parliament now. Yes, with the distant technologies that we're using, the remote technologies, then certainly there has been an increase in incident reports. Very good. Just for my information, This is perhaps a question better asked of Mr. Obey, and if that is the case, please have him answer. But the interpretation is important not only for our work here in committees, in the House, and for other Zoom meetings, but unlike interpreters who I think don't use these earpieces that we have here in the room that are provided by the House, but we too have, and I'm not making a complaint here, but we have to listen through devices all the time. So are we not exposed to the same risks from compressed sound or other factors that could threaten our hearing and so on? Is it not the same situation as for the interpreters? Well, that's an interesting question. And this is what we are trying to find out as the largest employers of interpreters across the country. We are trying to work with interpreters to find the answer to that. But there are no conclusive studies that show the effects of exposure to poor quality sound. What has helped us, as well as the House administration, is the sound study that was done by the NRC. We had a study with sound engineers, and this is an area that is in rapid development right now. We are seeing more research, and we need to do more research and fund more research to find out here in Canada and around the world what the effects are on those who are using technology to take part in meetings. So everyone is at some risk. The NRC has indicated that interpreters do not have access to the same quality of sound as the participants in virtual meetings. So the problem is that we have the technologies that are used by the interpreters. So, in fact, the technologies that are supposed to protect our interpreters are actually putting them at risk. Well, by protecting against acoustic shocks, then we are helping interpreters protect themselves in that way. But there are all sorts of other factors that mean that the sound coming through the various system is not optimal. So the sound that I produce then goes into the microphone through the systems and so on. And I would think my colleagues in the House administration would be able to speak more to the technical side of that. Mr. Obey, do you have anything to add to that? Well, what we have observed through the analyses that we have carried out is that there is a difference between the audio coming through the internet or to the room or from the room through the internet. So the sound as it is perceived is different. Is it a difference that is really a difference in sound quality or the perception that people have when they listen? We aren't sure yet, but there does seem to be a difference. We are working with world-class experts who are specialists in audio quality, and we are trying to improve the various aspects so that we have similar sound quality on both fronts. So I'm just trying to conclude here. I would like to know what the risks are for our interpreters that are different from the risks to those who are attending meetings all day with or without interpretation through virtual technologies, Zoom, and other technologies? If the risks are the same, then we have a very widespread problem in society. I'm just trying to understand this. I have no doubt at all that the House administration and the Translation Bureau, that you have been working very hard to purchase excellent equipment, to research these problems, and to reduce the problems to which our interpreters are exposed. But the same is not being done for regular people who are using Zoom. So is everyone exposed to these same risks? Please, yes, answer that, and then we will go to the next questioner. Thank you. Please go ahead. Well, I will just be quick. In answering Mr. McKinnon, the interpreters have a very different role from those that are participating in a meeting because the effort required is much higher. So there are different points that we have to analyze when it comes to sound quality. Ms. Seguin called on experts in the field of audio quality to work on this. Here, we are all receiving the same sound. Ms. de Bellefeuille, though, who is attending virtually, is using a different system, and so the interpreters perceive a different quality of sound when she speaks. And if she is listening to Mr. Ball, who is also virtual, the quality of the sound seems good to me. We're trying to find out. It seems to depend where the sound is coming from, and we are trying to see where the problems come from when people suffer fatigue, headaches, and so on. So we are working as well to try to improve the situation constantly. We want to have uniform sound quality from the two platforms. And this is a worldwide problem. This isn't just a problem specific to Parliament.
Mr. Julian, and then back to Mr. Broussard. Mr. Culkins.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So following up on the line of questioning that I had the last time we had this conversation, just as a quick reminder, Madam Seguin, the rate of injury prior to going to a hybrid or virtual parliament was significantly less than it is after we adopted the virtual and hybrid parliament, correct? Could you give us a reminder? Could you remind us of just what the ratio is? It's 5 times as many injuries, 10 times as many injuries?
So would you like for me to respond right now, or would
Please,
you like to?
yeah.
Yes, okay, no problem. So I think I would say that the rate of reported incidents, because I don't think that, there is a difference, distinction to be made between reporting an incident and an injury, because and this is exactly what we're trying to determine. But in terms of reported incidents, yes, they have gone. As I said before, in 2017, there were 10 reported incidents, 2018, 4, and in 2019, 23, and then it goes to 125.99 in 2021.
Okay. And Mr. Aubin, the equipment that's sitting in front of me right now is the equipment that was sitting here in 2017. The device that I'm listening to is the same as 2017. So the issue isn't the actual technology within the confines of the House of Commons, because this doesn't appear to have changed at all. I know I'm stating the obvious when I say the requirements to have virtual parliament, and I'm not questioning whether those things needed to happen or not. We all agree to these. But it seems to me that's the inability to control, and you said over the internet, the inability to control whether it's a feedback, whether it's the quality of the bandwidth or the connection. In your opinion, and you've done the best you can to get the best equipment possible for everybody involved, there are still so many wild cards involved in that we simply, this is as good as it's going to get going forward if we continue to maintain hybrid parliament or virtual parliament. Is that a fair statement? Would you agree with my statement?
I would agree, Mr. Calkin, that there's multiple variables that we can't control, such as the internet, as your point, and they do have an effect on the audio quality when people are coming in. But I would also say that we're striving, sir, to continuously make improvement in order to mitigate these, sir.
And the issues that sometimes we have is not necessarily members who have obviously devices that are provided for them to participate virtually, whether it's in the House of Commons or at committees or elsewhere. But it is noticeable that sometimes participants or witnesses who are asked to appear before committees might not be at the same standard as the equipment that's provided to members of the House, correct?
That is a correct statement, sir.
And due to, I don't know, is it a cost issue that we can't get these folks these witnesses the right equipment, or is it a time constraint? Is it what is preventing us from having a standard that witnesses are able to meet?
Ian, do you want to just?
Ian, yeah, if you've got the answer.
Sure. Thank you, through you, Mr. Speaker. There are some of those variables. It's not, generally speaking, a cost issue. We have a process where we automatically issue headsets, approved headsets to any witnesses that are appearing before committee. We try and get those out. We get them out as soon as the clerks are advised that someone's going to be appearing before a committee. And then, so generally speaking, it takes like 2 days to get a headset to someone anywhere in Canada. And so we've got that part. It's a pretty efficient process, but sometimes witnesses are asked to appear at the last minute, and there's other considerations as well. And so those are all variables that come into it as well. And we don't provide other equipment in terms of computers and their internet connections and stuff. It's
So we're blessed as members to have a tech-savvy department backing us up. Witnesses might not have that same level of tech savviness supporting them. That's all understandable, correct? So,
if I may,
yeah.
We do offer quite a bit of support, though.
Okay.
Stefan's team, the IT ambassadors, do pre-testing, onboarding of witnesses,
right.
and testing to make sure that they're able to participate, and we do that in advance of the meeting, and then at the meeting, we hope that we do our best to make sure that everything goes smoothly.
So my last question then to both Mr. Obey and Ms. Seguin, if we were to do away with as soon as possible, because and I think we're slated to go until June 23rd, unless we change our mind to do it sooner. The best way to ensure the safety and security of the people who are employed here at the House, particularly our interpreters, for which we seem to have a shrinking pool of talent, would be to resume the normal use and go back to a normal parliament and forego the video conferencing, teleconferencing that we're currently relying on heavily. Would you agree with that statement? Would both of you agree with that statement?
So if I may, through the speaker, the working conditions and are much preferable in person right now, both on the quality of sound and quantity of sound, for sure. So I would say that in terms of ensuring the health and safety of interpreters, as well as minimizing interruptions and the quality of the service, as things stand right now, when meetings occur in person, we have a better chance of.
Well, obviously, I mean the numbers support that 100%, right, Mr. Obey?
Yeah, definitely, Mr. Calkins. Like the more participants that are in person, you should see a reduction. I wouldn't want to say we have to remove it all, because you'll always have the case where we have witnesses that have to participate remotely.
Prior to COVID, sir, if I may, I mean we did have teleconferencing and sometimes video conferencing, but it wasn't the primary use, it was a secondary use when it was just not possible for witnesses to travel, or if they were from New Zealand or some other place like that. So, and I'm not suggesting that those things don't happen anymore. It's just not relying on it as a primary source of appearing before the House or a committee.
I think recognizing the existing technologies that are out there, sir, that's a fair statement. you'll see a reduction. The more participants are in person, you'll see a reduction of incidents. You should see that.
I would hope that everybody here at this committee, there at this board, would then take that under advisement. And it looks like we have no choice but to do what's right for our interpreters and return as quickly as possible to a non-hybrid parliamentary session. So thank you to the witnesses.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Calkins, and thank you to all of the people who have asked questions to sticking to that about 5 minutes. Nous allons continuer maintenant avec...
We'll now proceed with Ms. de Bellefeuille, followed by Mr. Julian.
Okay. Madame de Bellefeuille.
Ms. de Bellefeuille, please. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I'll be concise. A lot of the issues that I wish to raise were raised by the opposition whip, in fact. Now, we've spent a lot of time at the Board of Internal Economy on behalf of our interpreters. As you're aware, our interpreters are invaluable. They're essential to the proper functioning of our democracy and enable us to participate in the activities of the House of Commons and across the parliamentary precinct. And I'd like to sincerely thank them. Now, francophones and unilingual anglophones rely heavily on interpreters. And I'd like to agree at this point with the other members of this committee. We have to make decisions regarding putting an end to a hybrid parliament. The fact of the matter is that there have been a number of victims in this pandemic. Some have been victims of collateral damage. Some have suffered permanent injury, including our interpreters. And I think that the data on this is conclusive. And I hope that my colleagues factor this in and bear it in mind. I know that as whip of my party, there are a lot of members of parliament that enjoy the hybrid format and see a lot of benefits. But let us not forget that the hybrid format was put in place temporarily so that we could sit at an historic time in the midst of a pandemic. Now, at some point, there should be an end to this. In a couple of minutes, in fact, we're going to have an opportunity to talk about our transition plan to, in fact, and we'll have decisions to take over the upcoming weeks. And one should never forget all the lessons that have been learned today. In the short term, if we continue with the hybrid parliament, well, the findings of these studies might come to light in a year or two. And we're going to see in the meantime a spike in the number of workplace injuries. So we should be coming back to in-person sittings. And I agree wholeheartedly with my colleagues on this point. There might be some temptation to stick with a hybrid parliament, but let's never forget that the health and safety of our interpreters is at stake here, and it will send the clear message that their health and safety is not our concern, our primary concern. And I can tell you now that the members of the Bloc Québécois care very much about the health and safety of our interpreters. Are there any comments? Ms. Séguin, Mr. Aubé? Mr. Julian, the floor is yours. And then I think that will bring this meeting, part of the meeting, to an end. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Well, let's set aside our partisan stripes. Let's not rehash the debate that we had in the House. We should be focusing on the House administration and the best decisions that can be made. So I disagree with some of the remarks that have been made to date that would seem to be find a more appropriate place in the House of Commons and not here where in the Board of Internal Economy where we're supposed to take off our partisan hats. Now, that said, I have a question about a study that was undertaken. And if I'm mistaken, correct me. It was a study by the National Research Council on the health of our interpreters and the quality of the sound in the House of Commons. Was there a study commissioned and then undertaken by the National Research Country to that effect? response. Yes, if I may respond to that question, indeed, the Translation Bureau did commission a study by the National Research Council. We've talked about the quantity of sound and the quantity of sound. And before I hand the floor over to Matthew Ball, what I can tell you is the study was undertaken by the National Research Council in conjunction with the House administration. So we worked hand in hand. The Translation Bureau is responsible and accountable for the health and safety of the human beings, but there's also the technological and AV infrastructure. Matthew, if you could just shed a little bit more light on that study and elaborate on the ins and outs of it. Yes, indeed. We commissioned the National Research Council to assess both the quality and quantity of sound that reaches an interpreter's ears in the House facilities. Now, based on the report's findings, interpreters are protected by the protective mechanisms that have been put in place, the simultaneous interpretation consoles that were in fact replaced by the House of Commons recently. And in the space of half a second, any sound exceeding 84 decibels is in fact cut off thanks to these new consoles. The National Research Council has therefore determined that our interpreters are protected when it comes to the quantity of sound. Now let's turn our attention to the quality of sound. The problem is that the quality of sound is different in a hybrid format or in a remote format than in an in-person format. Oftentimes, the internet compresses the sound, it filters out certain sound qualities, and we want to understand the ramifications of the way the sound is processed, and we are not fully aware of what actually occurs at this stage. Could we get a copy of that report, please, says Mr. Julian. Yes, of course. I think that the Official Languages Committee has already received a copy of that report, if I'm not mistaken. Well, you can forward a copy to the Board of Internal Economy. Yes, in fact, it's in your binder. Not in my binder, says Mr. Julian. Well, make sure you get it, Mr. Julian, says the chair. Thank you very much. Now, if I've understood correctly, thank you very much for the copy of that study. If I've understood correctly, in the recommendations section of that report, there was an issue raised about the AV system and that there is room for improvement there. Is that correct? Mr. Aubé, do you want to take a stab at that? Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Yes, Mr. Julian, I can answer your question. In the report, they do refer to the in-person interpretation system, and based on their findings, there is a difference in terms of the sound, the internal and external sourced sound. What I can tell you is that the House administration has not been able to replicate these results. We've been on the search for other similar studies, and we've been in contact with the National Research Council to get a better handle on these findings of these reports. The House administration hasn't yet conducted all its independent tests, and we're not fully in agreement with the National Research Council.
System in its present setup configuration used for Zoom video conferencing in the committee room 425 is non-ISO 20109 compliant.
And I would agree with that, sir. I would say, sir, that right now in the virtual world, the virtual elements, we have not seen a system yet, sir, that it can integrate with any of the systems that we use right now that could be ISO compliant, sir. So that is a fair statement, sir. But the goal is to actually have quality of audio that is similar to that, sir, recognizing what's possible right now, sir. And we believe that it can be achievable, sir, very closely. but it's certainly not the ISO standards. All the elements of the supply chains, you can't say that they're ISO compliant, sir.
OK. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I think that in an upcoming meeting of the board, we should invite the union. So you have answered all of my questions, but I still have some concern because the information that we are getting from the union is a little bit different from what we are discussing today. So I think that we should hear from the union in an upcoming meeting. So this brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is the letter from the Interpreters Union, and this is in your binder. They are offering to provide us with a presentation. So what I would like to say is that if we ask them to do that, and then with the information that they provide, maybe that would prepare us for a visit.
From the AIIC that they submit the submission that they talked of. And the union, sorry, and ACEP as well. And then with that extra information, then we can see where we go from there. And I think that would be a fair way to proceed because from what I'm hearing and from what I'm feeling, certainly, I don't think there's any question that we want what's best for our interpreters. We don't want their health to go down a road that is going to hurt them or be something that they'll regret later in life. So with that extra information, hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions and improve the conditions. So thank you, Ms. Seguin. Mr. Ball, thank you, both of you, for appearing. Merci beaucoup à vous deux.
Thank you very much to both of you.
Go on to the fourth item, which is the quarterly financial report for the third quarter of 2021. Monsieur Saint-Georges, Madame Valiquette will be presenting. I'm sorry, I thanked our visitors, but I didn't thank our technical people as well, Mr. McDonald and Monsieur Aubé, for being with us. You've been very helpful. Thank you. Monsieur Saint-Georges, allez-y.
Please go ahead, Mr. Saint-Georges. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm speaking to you today to present the quarterly financial report for the quarter ending December 31st, 2021. Quarterly financial reports compare year-to-date financial information with the same quarter of the previous year. This unaudited, modified cash basis report is prepared by the House Administration. I certify the accuracy and reliability of the information contained herein. The approved annual authority for fiscal year 2021-22 in the amount of $561.4 million represents an increase of $22.5 million, primarily for measures to strengthen security support to members and for IT systems and assets acquired for facilities as part of the long-range vision and plan. As of December 31st, 2021, the House has spent the sum of $366.8 million, which represents an increase of $22.6 million over the previous fiscal year.
Remuneration category, the increase is mainly due to approximately $3.1 million for member severance benefits and approximately $2.5 for the increased travel following the gradual easing of public health restrictions. As for the House administration category, the increase is mainly due to a retroactive additional amount that is estimated at around $11.7 million for economic increases. This retroactivity goes back 3 years. In addition to the administration continues to incur costs to adapt to the needs of members in support of a virtual House proceedings and committees, as well as telework for the administration employees. By the third quarter of this year, the House is reporting a budget utilization rate of 65.3%, which represents a slight increase of 1.4% compared to the prior year. With that said, I want to report to the board that these results are on track with what was approved, and besides what was identified in the report, there are no other financial material variances or concerns to bring to your attention. The specifics of the report and variances can be found within your quarterly report package. Mr. Speaker, that concludes my presentation, and I welcome any questions the board might have.
Any questions? Mr. Broussard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we quickly approach the end of the fiscal year, some of the carry-forward provisions and the exercises that have taken place in the past, I assume will take place this time. Now, I understand that the House administration has some priority files. Could you indicate to the board what some of those priority files might be?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Broussard. In terms of our carry forward, we do expect to carry forward this year, and we do a forecasting for the entire fiscal year. In terms of our carry forward files that we have in the past, I would welcome Elaine in terms of etiquette to provide some of those file specifics.
If I may, just to be clear, what specific projects do you have in mind for this year as well? If you can
for this fiscal year. This fiscal year focuses on COVID-19, obviously the increased costs that we're seeing for the House administration, as well as various other projects that we have in play, and perhaps.
We're in the middle right now. We're in the middle of doing our strategic planning exercise for the upcoming fiscal year. Projects are being submitted for funding out of the House administration portion of the carry forward, and those decisions have not yet been made. I don't know if there's.
Yeah, the projects that Elaine's referring to, we do have some larger ones in play. For example, we have one called CAMP, which is looking at how we manage assets within the House of Commons. That is a project that's been in place since, I think, 2 years, and will continue on for another 3 years. That, of course, obviously, would be funded through the excess carryovers from year over year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You've also noted in the report $1.7 million of spending this year as it relates to the pandemic. Now, I know that in some of the past reports that you've indicated, the redeployment of employees from their usual pandemic-related work has occurred. Do you have a sense right now of how many House employees have recently been deployed to pandemic responsibilities?
I don't have the specifics with me. Happy, though, to investigate further and provide that information to the BOIE.
Okay, I would like that. Thank you. And my final question, page 4 of the report speaks about the fact that the House administration is monitoring the impact of the recent protests on House finances. What are some of the impacts that you believe that you're going to see it's caused?
That is a very good question. We have looked at in terms of the impact, very immaterial to date, more on the resource side in order to ensure that the precinct was secured, essentially. However, at this time, it probably will not show up in the results because of materiality.
So you expect that most of that will be in relation to parliamentary security then? Or?
That is correct,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions of Mr. St-Georges? Okay, then. We'll move on to number 5, I believe. Item number 5. Mr. St-Georges, I'll let you continue.
Merci.
Please go ahead, Mr. St-Georges. Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I'm speaking to you today in an effort to obtain direction from the board on certain temporary policies that have been put in place to assist members in overcoming the challenges associated with the COVID-19 pandemic and are set to expire on March 31st, 2022. Under those temporary policies, the limit on advertising expenditures is increased from 10 to 20% of the budget. Second, members may include in their advertising and print materials certain messages and solicitations for certain donations related to 2019. Members may budget for internet service costs incurred by their teleworking staff. Mr. Chairman, you will also find in your packet a letter from a member of the board requesting that the board consider making the increase in the advertising limit to 20% of the member's office budget permanent. The administration has conducted a preliminary review of member spending trends since the temporary policy to increase the advertising limit was put into place. As of January 31st, 2022, 3% of members had exceeded the standard 10% limit. This percentage was 13% at the end of the previous fiscal year. In accordance with a decision made by the board in December 2015, the member's office budget is increased annually based on the adjusted consumer price index. Therefore, the purchasing power for advertising increases proportionately. As of April 1st, the member's office budget will increase by 3.7%. The cumulative increase over the past 5 years totaled 8.9%. This translates into an average increase in advertising purchasing power of $3,531 per MP.
The board maintain the increased advertising limit, that is until the end of June 2022, while the administration reviews the implications of setting it permanently. Should the board decide to discontinue the increased limit when the administration presents its findings before the end of June, it will suggest alternatives that will minimize the impacts on members considering they may have already committed to spending plans for the entire fiscal year. With regard to the reimbursement of net costs of internet services incurred by member employees, 25% of members have made use of their temporary policy. There have been fewer internet reimbursements this year compared to the prior year, which was 35% of members that had submitted claims. As this policy impacts member employees who are teleworking, we are also suggesting and recommending that this be extended till the end of June 2022, and that administration also return the board with a recommended approach for the future. In summary, the administration is recommending, first of all, that all three policies be extended till the end of June, and secondly, that administration be provided with a mandate of assessing the potential impacts of any further extensions or any change to these policies. Mr. Speaker, that concludes my presentation, and once again, welcome any questions you may have.
Are there any questions or comments? Questions ou commentaires? Madame de Bellefeuille?
Oui, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm satisfied to see that the administration is open to the idea of increasing the percentage because, yes, we have inflation, but practices have changed when it comes to advertising. MPs can promote their services and their activities to the public through written and other media. So there are more places where we can advertise our services, our contact information, telephone numbers, and so that people can get in touch with us as quickly as possible. But I have some misgivings about what has been proposed by the administration. I plan for my advertising starting April 1st, so our budget goes to March 31st.
What you're proposing seems like a bit of a funny practice. Managers have to manage these items in an accountable and responsible way. So I don't know what kind of arrangement you would propose, aside from committing to the 10% per fiscal year. I'm wondering if the administration is prepared to change the standing order. I don't know if I have the support of members, although I am asking for it. I think that we are ready to go from 10 to 20% so that we can spend that portion of our budgets on advertising. This won't have any impact on the budget. We're not asking for extra money. We're just asking for greater flexibility. And, of course, we want to tailor our advertising to our particular respective regions. So my first request would be that we move on a permanent basis from 10 to 20% of eligible advertising costs. Now, if my colleagues turn me down on this, well, I can't really get a sense of the room right now because I'm appearing remotely. But at least the pilot project and analysis should continue through to the 31st of March rather than stopping in June, which strikes me as a very bad idea for managers who are trying, as of the 1st of April, to plan their media placements and all their activities.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some questions in regards to how things line up with the recommendations and the policies that have been implemented tangentially and how they are meant to serve each other. Notwithstanding the issue that Madame de Belfoy is bringing forward, I have some thoughts on that. But the part that I want to look at is Part C, the reimbursement of reasonable high-speed internet service costs for members' employees who are working from home in support of parliamentary functions as a charge to the member's operating budget. I guess what I'm curious to try and find out is I'm unclear as to whether or not the vaccine mandate policy, insofar as it pertains to not only the House, which seems to have somewhat different rules on masking and so on than the rest of the precinct, why would we not link the high-speed internet service costs for staff who can't access the precinct with the policy that forces them to not access the precinct?
Monsieur Saint-Georges?
Certainly, and as we go through the analysis, that may be a recommendation that we come back to the board with. At this time, we're looking at the three policies together because they were adopted together, but they may have to be carved out and looked at individually.
The other question I have is, how do you, sorry, Michelle, did you want to speak to that?
I just want to mention that the policy with respect to the reimbursement of high-speed internet predates the vaccine mandate. It was at the beginning of the pandemic where everybody was recommended to stay home. So
but that's now morphed into a mandate. I mean,
yeah, but the policy,
the employee's pass has been disabled from accessing the precinct if they haven't provided proof of vaccination. Am I missing something?
No, you're right about that other aspect of it, but I'm just saying that the policy.
No, I understand.
Yeah, so it's
so
just I just wanted to
the policies were not related at the start, but
yeah.
Now because of the imposition of mandates, I think they're actually intertwined. Is my point.
There may be an interrelationship, but that's not the purpose for us to come to be before the board.
The other question I have is, how do you enforce having an increased amount for your budget for a quarter of a year over the broad reporting, the annual reporting that members are required to report over? How are you going to manage the ability of a member to spend something in the first quarter when their only requirement is to be within budget at the end of 4 quarters?
Yeah, and I think when we come back with those options, we'll be obviously bringing to the table various formulas, one of which you could look at, for example, is a pro rata of the first 3 months and the last 9 months, and whatever that becomes an average moving forward. As Madame de Bellefeuille said, another option also is just continue it to the remaining of the year. So I think that we will bring several options, or actually 2 or 3 options for consideration, and be certain that whatever we bring forward will mitigate or manage that planning process.
And I guess my last comment will go back to the proposal by Madame de Bellefeuille to make the 10% or the 20% increase on advertising permanent. Does she foresee or expect, or would she like to see changes made into what can be advertised vis-a-vis party logos and other things as part of our advertising policy? Is there other things that she wants changed other than the amount, or is it just the amount?
Madame de Bellefeuille, la question est à vous.
Ms. de Bellefeuille, the question is for you. Mr. Chairperson, should I answer that question now? Well, I think that there is a discussion taking place, so regarding your proposal. So I was going to wait, but I think that there are questions about your 2 proposals, so why not proceed and address them now? So you're recognizing me, sir? Yes, well, thank you. Perfect. Just to respond very quickly to my colleague, I'd like changes to the standing order have to do only with the percentage. I think that in all other respects, the standing order meets our needs. The only thing that I'm calling for is that we move from 10 to 20%. That will have no bearing on our overall budget. The exceptions that were permitted throughout the pandemic should now be removed. We get the sense that across almost every province, the reopening has well and truly begun, to do with mask wearing, for example, in Ontario, in Quebec. These measures were tailored to the pandemic, and appropriately so. I think the standing order is fine, but I just have 2 proposals to make for the purpose of making a decision. I don't think that the House administration is necessarily asking us to make a decision right now, but the financial year ends on the 31st of March, so as of the 1st of April, I'm calling for an increase from 10 to 20% and that the $500 limit per event be increased. And I'll leave it up to my colleagues to propose those amounts. I would suggest moving from 500 to 1,000 as a cap. I don't think that we need to have a big discussion about a major overhaul of this standing order. I just want us to have the ability to change aspects of our advertising budget. Mr. Brassard?
Or a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. And it's in regards to the resources that are currently being provided by the House. We saw this increase in budget because everything had shut down, including those resources. Have we seen a significant uptake as a result of these resources now being provided? Are we seeing less advertising coming out of the members' budgets because they've now referred back to the House for their printing and advertising needs? Have you got any data that supports that, or have you seen anything in regards to that?
At this time, we haven't gone in that depth of analysis comparing this year to pre-pandemic or even through the pandemic till now, and that's what we're proposing to do over the next 3 months.
Okay. I took advantage of the advertising opportunities, and I know many of my colleagues did, and the increase in budget, but I have seen myself pull back into the resources that have been provided by the House without using some of the external sources that we were doing at the beginning of the pandemic. So I expect that you'll probably see an increase with respect to the amount of resources that are currently being provided by the House that weren't there at the beginning of the pandemic, which was the reason why this increased, as you're aware. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, seeing no other questions, then what we'll do is we have 3 options now, I guess. We have 2 that were offered by Madame de Bellefeuille, and one was offered by Monsieur Saint-Georges, the recommendation that we have in our package. How do we want to start this? Do we want to start with the new proposals and then work our way back, or start with the recommendation that was made initially? Mr. Julian, yes? Okay, we'll start with the recommendation that was made by Monsieur Saint-Georges. Do we have acceptance of this recommendation? Est-ce que nous avons l'unanimité?
Unanimous agreement? No, Ms. de Bellefeuille has said that we do not.
On to the next option. Nous allons à la prochaine.
We'll now turn to our attention to the next option that was also proposed by Ms. de Bellefeuille.
To the 29th of March, 2023. Alors, allonger jusqu'à.
So extend this until the 29th of March 2023. Would that be amenable to all members? Mr. Julian, you had something to add? Well, I didn't really understand what Ms. de Bellefeuille is proposing exactly. She wants all of those components to expire on the 29th of March. Yes, to be extended until the 29th of March 2023 instead of stopping in June, because it would be in the middle of a fiscal year. Am I right there, Ms. de Bellefeuille, in my summary of your proposal? Response. Well, there are some elements that I disagree with and others that I agree with. So what I'm proposing and what I'm asking members to decide on and to vote on is, are you in agreement that as of the 1st of April 2022 until the 29th of March 2023, that the eligible advertising a percentage go from 10 to 20%. I'm prepared to make that compromise so that the House can conduct its analysis so that as of the 1st of April 2023, that if we'll decide whether we decide to change the standing order on a permanent basis or whether we go back to the original standing order. That's my proposal. Do we agree with Ms. de Bellefeuille on that? No, I do not, says Mr. Julian. But there was, if we were to add this aspect of advertising to the proposal, and an extension to the 30th of June, I'd agree to that. I don't understand. I don't understand, Mr. Chairperson. No, I don't either, says the Chair. Ms. de Bellefeuille, I'll give you the opportunity to re-explain your rationale. It was my understanding that the proposal was for an extension until the 29th of March. Well, says Mr. Julian, I don't agree with that proposal unless it's through to the 30th of June, except for advertising. I'd agree with those two measures together, but not one without the other. Well, if I can just make an attempt, Mr. Chairperson, of clarifying all of this. Listen, here's what I'm proposing, essentially. In the proposal of the House Administration, there are a number of components. There is a component regarding my request to move from 10 to 20% of eligible advertising percentage. I would have liked that to be permanent, but I agree to it being extended for the purposes of study until the 29th of March 2023. I also agree that the cost of internet services and other measures be extended through to June. And basically, the only aspect that would change here is the advertising component. So maybe if the way I've put it, he will agree with what I've just said. I agree with you, Ms. de Bellefeuille, says Mr. Julian.
Do we agree with that? Yes, I think there is agreement. Very good. The decision is made. And now we will go in camera for the next item. We will just wait for 3 or 4 minutes to move in camera.
Thank you.